Alright everybody, here we are with the Apex setup video. I'm just more going to kind of talk through like the actual Apex and my personal best way of doing things. And if you are going to run an Apex in the future or have thought about one, then maybe some part of this video will help you either in decision making process or your own setup. You'll also kind of get an idea of how long this actually takes to set up if you want to do it the right way. If you just want to slap it together and say, hey look, I've got an Apex on my system, and just hope you never have to take it apart or replace a part or something, then cool, you can probably do it in half the time or less. But the way that I've put this thing together, it'll be easy if a component goes bad, something like that. I mean, the most you'll have to do is undo a zip tie or a bread tie, and then, you know, remove it from the whole system and replace a part. So as you can see, I went from cutting the video to having parts ready to be drilled into it. So basically between that time, when the board was cut, I took a marker, I set everything on there, see the best way that it would all fit. I outlined everything, and then I placed all the screws and mounted it all to make sure it all fit. Then I took it out back and I sprayed it with truck bed liner. So now we're picking up there, where here is the actual bolting on of all the parts onto the board. So the best way that I've found is if you build everything, including your app, from left to right and top to bottom. So you have 8 plugs. If 1 is the top left and 8 is the bottom right, and then you kind of put your components in that way, it makes for very easy setup. Now the whole process is lengthy. So with this footage and the footage that I cut out, it's probably between 4 and 6 hours easily. And for that reason, I'm going to make a whole second part on how to work the app, because that's a whole nother like hour and a half worth of footage by itself. And I just think that might be the part that's most interesting to people, if any of it's interesting to people. So I don't want to pack it in at the end when nobody will see it or sit through the rest of this stuff. So I cut these triangular holes for the wiring. Like each one of these components has at least 1 wire, some of them have 2, and of course the wires have to be like 15-20 feet long or something completely crazy. So I use those as spots because I cut these boards to fit. Specifically, this one was for the back of a Reefer 350 to fit exactly in that hole. So I needed a space to get some wiring through, make it look all clean, but I also wasn't trying to spend a whole bunch of time routering things out and all that. So the triangles work just fine for my purposes. And all of the wires fit within those 3 just fine. So I put everything, all of the components on the board are wired around to the back, and then I have mounting zip ties that hold all of the wiring back there nice and separated. So you don't, like all the wires are not all jammed together and twirled around. Each wire, if you were to pull the board out from the back of the stand, you would be able to easily trace one, yank it, and replace it. So here I see that originally I had thought that I could mount, I think this was like one of the first ones that I had done. So I actually did 2 boards in the same day. That's why I already had this one cut and all these holes lined up. I did cut 2 boards the same day and then set them all up and drilled them. Well, at the time I had place that fluid monitoring module sideways, and I didn't think about the fact that the wiring was going to butt up against this other energy bar. So right here I figure out like, oh well, that's obviously not going to work, so then I have to change it now, which is fine. But those are the things that you need to think about, is each one of these things has an Aqua Bus cable, and that thing is not very forgiving. It's when it's like sticks out of the side of a component, it needs 3 inches at least, so you're not looking at jamming the cord into a wall. Or it's like specifically on the feeder, it's larger than is in your head when you're setting up the tank, so generally it has to go on the side of the tank, because on the back side you need to have like 4 or 5 inches back there for the feeder and then for the Aqua Bus cable. And talking about the Aqua Bus cables, they're not USB cables. So I know that some of the literature says that, but if you just buy this thing and you don't read each individual part and you go start plugging stuff into your computer and stuff, you're gonna fry some stuff, because a lot more power goes through these Aqua Bus cables than goes through USB, and you'll catch something on fire or burn it up. There's the fluid monitoring module I was talking about. Another thing was I set all these things to where they had to be placed from the bottom up, and that kind of adds a little more security, where like all of them are going to have to come off of there at the same time. They're not just going to be able to fall off individually, or I don't know. I screw this thing into the stand, so there's not really much of a way that any of this stuff is going to fall off of there anyway. But you know, again, I guess that also makes it potentially kind of a pain when you go to have to take it apart for some reason, but ideally you're not going to have to. So here it is sitting up, just pretty much, I mean, it's all mounted up, it's all done that way. And then from there it goes into, now we have to place all of the wiring, which is just a very tedious task. So initially I take all of the probe wires and get them all separated, because they come in a giant bunch. I mean, they're individually rolled up, but if you leave them that way on install day, it's just one more headache that you're going to run into. So I separate each one of them, I lay them all out at the same length, and then on this board I think I just kind of left them all on the front of the board. But on boards after this, I've wrapped them initially all the way around the back, and then bread tied them, or placed them or zip tied them back there to the wires, so that that's already done. So basically when I show up at somebody's house to put this thing in, everything has been wired and wrapped around the back and zip tied to the back of the board, and then it's just literally a matter of putting it all into the sump or plugging into the wall. And you know, I mean, that's all there is to it. Then the whole rest of it is the programming aspect of it, which is not, I mean, it's not that big of a, once you know what you're doing, it's not that bad. Initially it's like there's a lot of stuff going on here, but you know, in the second video when we go through all the programming, it's gonna show you pretty much everything. I mean, there's so much stuff this thing can do, I can't show it all to you in a YouTube video, but it'll cover the majority of the stuff that anybody reasonably would want to do. Anything past that's going to be like engineer level stuff, where you're programming when one of your dosers comes on, it turns off this plug but turns this plug on, and that activates, you know, the feeder, and it just, you can make each component run off of itself in the programming, really. But I mean, that's high level stuff that really you just have to just really want to get into it for fun, basically, to make it really worth it. These cables are the 1-link cables, so each individual component on the Apex has 2 different ways that it can be run. It can be run by a 1-link, so that the 1-link transfers communication and power through one cable from the power supply to the unit, and then, or it can be run from an Aqua Bus cable and a power cable. So you effectively, say you have a dosing pump. If you ran it with your Aqua Bus cable, that's your communication. It goes to your power block or to your Apex. But then you also have to have a power plug that goes to the wall. But with a 1-link cable, you only have to run the doser to the power block. So we're gonna put this thing under the stand now. So there was a whole lot of wiring that thing, and each individual wire and from the Apex head alone for the probes has to go around. So I suggest leaving some space between your doser and your power block if you do it this way, because you're going to want those cables from the Apex to be able to go in between something or around some of the other components so that it doesn't like super overcrowd. So back there we've got a kind of just a plug-in GFI. We require them on all of our maintenance tanks, so you don't burn your house down. I highly suggest that. These things are surge protected by themselves, but that does not mean they are fireproof. So well, I kind of skipped through a lot of this right here. I had maybe an hour and a half of video from this point, but it's very dark down here. You can't tell what I'm doing a lot of the time. But at this point, I've got everything put in there and set up the way that it needs to be, but I'm cutting the tubes for the dosing pumps. So they give you a pretty good amount of tube. Every time that I set one up, I'm worried like I don't have enough, so I make sure that whenever I run a tube and I cut it, that is exactly as much as I need. I don't kind of don't cut like willy-nilly or anything, because you can't really afford that. For our dosing, so our dosing is a 6-part, and that's why we have so many dosers. So a lot of people look at this and they're like, whoa, why do you have 6 dosers? Well, we have a 6-part dosing regimen. So calcium, magnesium, and alkalinity, of course, and then we've got iodide and strontium and essential trace. So our maintenance clients have 6 dosers, so they don't have to dose all those things. I realize you could just dose, a lot of people just dose calcium and alkalinity, or calcium, magnesium, alkalinity. If you're going to do that, then I would use the 4th one to run like reef nutrition, or some kind of amino acid in that 4th one. I'm drilling holes for the bottle so that the lines stay down in the bottle, which I've found very effective. Now, the Apex is able to, you can put in there how many milliliters your bottles are, tell it how many to do per day. It's going to remind you, hey, you're almost out of calcium, you're almost out of alkalinity, stuff like that. It's going to tell you when your waste is full if you have a Trident. So I also don't have the Trident on here. That's a whole, it's very easy to set up the Trident, but the programming and getting used to it, and it's really important that you learn how many milliliters of dose or of element that it takes to keep your levels where you want them. So if you want a 9 and it takes X number of milliliters to keep your tank at a 9 every day, all day, you want to know that before you tell your Trident that to take over for you, because it's going to run with a certain gap or a margin. It's going to say, I'm only going to dose this many per day to keep it here. So you need to know that that's how many it takes, because if it takes more, I'm just going to stop and go back to your table. If it takes less, I'm going to stop and go back to your table. So you need to have it within a pretty close range of how much each one of those things takes. An important thing to note here is once you have your lines run and your doser is dosing all the time, a couple of your elements are going to clog up on the end where they drip into the water. Now whether or not they're in the water or they're not in the water, it doesn't seem to matter. That especially the alkalinity, that's just going to clog up there on the end in a big white ball of hard alkalinity that's going to block up the tube. So you need to, during your regular maintenance, clear that line out. Otherwise, it's going to get backed up, pressure's going to build on that line, and then it jacks with your head. It can kind of push it backwards, and that is not good for your motors. So I put the dosing lines in the overflow chamber, and then I put all the probes in, I think, the refugium chamber. I think this is the new style setup, so they're in the refugium chamber at the end. And then I put the supply line for the Trident in the return chamber. That's pretty much the place where I found to be the least amount. There's no microbubbles in there. There's less stuff in the floor to get sucked up. And not to mention, that line that they give you for the Trident is not very long. So you can't extend it or shorten it in any way. So you just kind of got to work with what you got. And in some of these stands, it just won't reach any further. So you got to make do. Now, I have had questions about why we have 2 power supplies when there are 8 plugs on each power supply. Well, in this type of setup, we are not running like the pump and the wave maker, so we did need a few more plugs. I think we actually needed at least 1 more plug, and so we probably required like 9. But the biggest thing is, even if you're running this setup with all the Apex stuff, so most of that stuff doesn't require plugs in that case, like the wave maker, it just plugs in directly to the power supply through the 1-link. Well, each power supply has room for like 3 1-links and 2 or 3 Aqua buses. So each one of these dosers has a 1-link cable, and then the Trident has a 1-link cable, and the wave maker has a 1-link cable. So that alone is 5 1-link cables. You only have 3 spots on 1 power supply. So we have 2 power supplies, even if each one of them only is being used for 3 of its plugs. Then you'll add things like a refugium light, and that'll be another plug. But it does leave you with a lot of open plugs down there. It would almost be better if, the power supplies were just a whole grouping of like 6 1-links and only 2 like wall plugs on them. But ultimately, that's just the way it goes, so you need these extra power supplies to make all that stuff happen. The Aqua buses will jump from one piece of, or one component to the other, but the 1-link cables don't do that. The main takeaways are cable management, and make sure to set everything up left to right, top to bottom. When your app looks just like your board, should you build a board, but at any rate, if your app looks just like your setup, you're not going to have any problems identifying things. You'll be able to easily communicate things to support. They'll understand it better if you can explain it in that manner. If you just throw everything on there willy-nilly and say, I'll figure it out later, then you're going to be in just a world of hurt 6 months, a year down the line, when if in the event that something happens to it and you need to get a part warranted, but you can't even identify where that is with all your cable wiring, that's just an absolute mess. I'm going to end this very long video with some pictures here of the final setups in the aquariums and such. Everyone sees them, like the pictures on the video in the store or whatever, and they think like, oh, that looks super easy, but as you can see, there's a lot goes into making sure that one of these is done right. We're going to come back with a part 2 here, maybe in a week or 2 weeks. It's going to show the whole of the programming, so it should take you from front to back on the actual programming of the system. Once you have it all plugged in, haven't touched the app whatsoever, it'll take you from that point to where everything is operating. So that's going to be another lengthy video, probably a little more informative for people who already have their system set up but aren't really good at the programming side, or maybe just didn't know that it can even do whatever this thing is that they're now able to see, and didn't know about it before. So look forward to that coming up. We are gearing up to start moving the store. We're moving a couple miles, or maybe even less than that, away from where we are now, but a more higher traffic area. So that's going to be a big deal for us coming up. We still have the online store going, of course, so no matter where you are or what you need, as long as it has something to do with aquariums, we can probably help you. If you give us a call over the phone, we oftentimes give advice on products and things like that, help people move in the right direction towards what kind of purchase they really need to make. A lot of times people think they need stuff that they don't, or they want unrealistic stuff, and we get them going on the right track. So give us a shout, come into the store. Look forward to our Instagram. We got a lot of stuff going on over there, and the Facebook also. Right now we're doing a cycle challenge where we're testing buckets of water to see what method cycles faster. We're constantly posting just things going on in the area. Most recently we had Lou from Tropic Marin come over and do a demonstration in the store and talk to people about the ups and downs of calcium and magnesium, and how most people are getting it wrong. Like if you're using a 1-for-1 dosing regimen, but you're using more of one than the other, then there's probably an issue. So we're constantly trying to do things like that in the store, bring more people in just to learn and advance their hobby and stay in the hobby longer, which is good for us and good for everyone. So I hope that you like this lengthy kind of a rant video on the Apex system one, and I hope that you come back for part 2 of the programming. So leave me a comment, let me know if there's any of these components on this thing that you want to see more dived into, or either the programming or the actual use of it, like the fluid monitoring meter or fluid monitoring module, or the optical sensors, anything like that. How we have it set up on this one was one optical sensor goes in the ATO, one goes in the sump. So if your alarm goes off for the one in the sump but not the ATO, your ATO is not working. So just stuff like that. So give me a shout, let me know what you think, and we'll see you in the next video.